Hey, Aaron Rabinowitz here for Red Giant TV. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that we have a new short film at Red Giant called Order Up, directed by Seth Worley, the Webby Award-winning director of Plot Device. You can check that out at redgiant.com/Order Up. Okay, back to it. In this episode of Red Giant TV, director Seth Worley will have you jumping for joy, or at least you'll walk away knowing how to use After Effects to make it look like someone can jump really, really high, which is kind of like simulated CGI animated jumping for joy, which is really actually kind of sad now that I say that out loud. Take it away, Seth.
So how does this work? I mean, am I gonna like catch you or like...
So here's the plate as shot. Ben acts as if Cameron jumps up in the air, but Cameron actually just jumps and runs off. And then, I like how Ben drops his phone. That was Ben's touch. I thought it was funny. So then it falls. And obviously the reason we call it the single bound is because of superheroes and also because Cameron is single. So let's bring this down and let's drop it into a comp. And we'll rename it plate so we know what we're working with. And first thing we want to do, so we want to take Cameron right there, and we want to use a mask to cut him out. Let's actually duplicate our plate first, and we'll call it plate Cameron. And then this new plate Cameron layer, we'll select our pen tool, and we will create a mask, intricate detailed mask around Cameron. And when that's done, we'll go to layer, time, freeze frame. So then we have that frozen in time, and we will make that layer start right there at that point in time. And then we're going to keyframe the position so that it flies off. We'll go a few frames over and move him up and over and up so that he flies out of frame. Now you can see on the actual plate he's still there, but we'll take care of that now. We're going to erase him. Double click on the plate. Make sure you're on the frame where our keyframing starts. Select our stamp tool. We come down here and make sure lock source time is selected. Move our source time, our offset time, to a place where Cameron is gone, and that's a good place right there. And we'll make sure that our duration is set to constant before we do anything. And we'll come up here and we will just paint over Cameron. And not just that space, because he's going to run out of frame in the next few frames, so we need to paint that entire half of the picture. And it's kind of hard because you can't really see any difference, but just so you got to make sure you color the whole thing in really, really well. So then, if we watch it play back in our comp, Cameron will jump and fly off out of frame. That works pretty great. So our next step is if you look over here, you can see that Cameron's shadow over down on the bottom right corner, it still moves with the original plate. So what we're going to do is duplicate our plate and call it plate shadow. And then we're going to go, let's just collapse all these things so we can see what we're working with. Go up to layer time and enable time remapping. And now you see we have these keyframes at the beginning and end of simulating time. So let's go ahead and select a keyframe at the beginning, right here in the timeline, in the beginning of where the shadow happens, shadow stuff happens. And go to, after the shadow leaves frame, make another keyframe. Let's get rid of our first keyframe and get rid of our last keyframe. So we just have these two. And then we want to basically take the second keyframe and stretch it over. So now it's getting to that point in time quicker. So the shadow happens faster down there. And now the thing is, Ben's moving really fast too. So we obviously want to create a mask around that shadow. So once we've done that, we can feather the mask a little bit to make it blend a little better. And then we want to actually affect the opacity so it fades out, so it doesn't stay there the whole time. So after the shadow part happens, we'll make sure that we fade it out. Perfect. And our next step, we're going to drop Cameron now at the end of the timeline. So we'll go toward the end of the timeline where we're supposed to stop, and we'll duplicate our Cameron layer and rename it Plate Cameron Falling. Let's basically go down here, move him back down, get rid of our position keyframes, scale him down to where it looks like he's farther back there, and still a little too big. It's about the right size. And now we're going to use our puppet tool. Let's double click on this, and we're going to actually use the puppet tool and select pins in all these main little joints. The hands, the elbows, the shoulders, right in the middle, waist, and feet, and one on the head. And now we're going to move him to where his arms are going down. And he's going to look weird. He looks kind of like in Half-Life, the zombie dudes with the crabs on their heads, but with the head crabs on their heads. It looks, pretty ridiculous. But we want it to look it's going to be a motion blur, it's going to be fast. It just needs to look like he is bracing himself, like he's falling more than he is, flying up. So once we come back into here, and we can now, reapply keyframes to our positions so that he then flies, starts from above frame and falls down into the house. So that looks good. So now that we've done that, we need to see him disappear into the house. So we're going to create a new solid and make sure it's above our plate of Cameron falling. Move it down to right about there, and then we're going to select our track matte and do alpha inverted matte on plate Cameron falling. So now it's using that solid as an obscuration layer. So there you go, it looks good. Step 5, let's put a hole in the roof. I have this picture here of a hole in a cardboard box, and really it's just a black circle once we get down to it, but I still like to use it. So I'll drop that into the comp. I'll create a mask around it, around the hole, and there, perfect, done. Except also, let's scale it down, bring it up onto the roof, place it where the hole should be, unlock our scale X and Y values, and just squish it vertically. And then we want to apply hue saturation layer onto the cardboard box layer, bring our saturation all the way down, and our lightness can kind of go up a little bit. But actually, let's mess with our blending modes to see what works right. It's one of these guys up here, and I think actually darker color is going to work best. That's good. We need to bring the lightness up a little bit. And actually, let's go and just do brightness contrast after. Yeah, we need brightness contrast. So we'll apply a brightness contrast filter. Turn the brightness up a little bit, contrast up a little bit, and there we go. That's looking good. And then you want to adjust your opacity levels so that it's not visible. It's only visible where a hole should eventually show up in the house. All right, so our next step is to add leaves. And these leaves are some ground leaves and tree leaves from when he jumps up, and it helps add a sense of realism. And then the leaves when he lands on the roof later on, right about here. When he lands on the roof, we want leaves to fly up right there when he flies through. And what I've actually done is I have on redgiantpeople.com, where there are several presets you can get for all kinds of things, and I've put a whole bunch. I've got these preset particular layers that I've gone ahead and uploaded here for you to work with and add for this kind of, you can use them anywhere, however you want, but they're good starting points. And if you happen to shoot the exact same plate that I shoot, then they're preset and ready to go. But just in case you do not shoot the same plate that I shot, I'll walk you through kind of how to customize it and what I did. So let's start by going in the timeline to the frame where he hits the roof. And right here's when he hits the roof technically right about there, but let's go maybe one frame before. And then we're going to create a new solid. That's not a solid. We're going to create a new solid and call it particular roof leaves. I'm going to learn to spell too. Particular roof leaves. And then we're going to drop particular onto that solid and we're going to go up to Animation Presets once you've downloaded the presets that I made, and do single bound roof leaves. And now you'll see the leaves fly up right when he hits the roof. And just to kind of show show you how I customize it and stuff like that. I have keyframed the particles per second to where it is a burst of particles rather than an ongoing stream of particles. So it starts at 0, it goes to 500, and then 2 more goes to 0. So it's a quick burst of these particles. And velocity is set at 200. So you can see all the kind of direction stuff that I have set here. The emitter size, Y and Z are at 0, but X is at 139, so it's a wider, flat emitter. And then the particle itself is a cloudlet particle. And you can see the size settings and everything, but the biggest thing is the color. It's set to random from gradient, and that gradient, in case you've never done this before, is found here in the color over life tab. And I've got you can go in here and customize these colors, and I've set them to resemble the colors of the leaves that are already on the roof, which is not a very wide spectrum of color, but you want to. But to have it look natural and organic, you want to have not just one solid color that it looks. So the color random from gradient is great because you can select 3 fairly close to each other colors, like all these leaves are, but there's still a very subtle amount of diversity in the coloring there. So you can customize that there. And physics is the other place where we get this look. And honestly, I would love to tell you exactly how what I'm doing here, but I don't totally know. The truth is, I basically get to a thing that I'm happy with by messing around with this and learning it myself. So get in there and don't be afraid to break stuff. Turbulence field, I have no idea what I've done here, but I know that I've got, by playing with the effect position, the size was not necessary, but the effect position helped. And that combined with the spin amplitude and spin frequency settings here, give it this air resistance. Well, that is at 0.5, but give it this kind of simulated air resistance and turbulence that you'd probably get from leaves flying up in the air. Now, so you can see with this specific emitter up here, this specific layer, the leaves are kind of going everywhere, where they kind of need to settle on the roof. And there's a couple ways you could do this. One really elaborate way is you could go into your physics model and set it to bounce. And I've done this in other tutorials. You can, like the Exploding Man uses this. You can go there to see it. But you bring in a solid and have it simulate the roof, and so then the leaves will land on that solid and simulate their landing and stuff. But honestly, I didn't need to be that complex for this for this effect to sell. So I kept the physics model at air, and what I do is I can just take this solid, this track mat that we already have set for Cameron, and duplicate that, and bring the duplicate above our particular roof leaves. Go ahead and set the visibility off for our original. And I'll go to particular roof leaves, and I'll set the track mat to alpha inverted mat. So it'll use that black solid above it as a inverted alpha mat. So now our leaves are only existing up above the roof. So that looks pretty good. So now we have 2 other leaves we want to set in, and that's the ground leaves and the roof leaves. And those are pretty similar, pretty much the same as the roof leaves. Sorry, the ground leaves and the tree leaves. And those are fairly similar to the roof leaves, except for a couple things. So I'll walk you through that. So let's create a new solid. Call it particular. Man. Next I'm going to hopefully find a tutorial on typing things. Particular, let's start with the ground leaves. And we'll apply particular, obviously. And let's go to the point where we want the ground leaves to fly up. And then probably right as Cameron hits liftoff. Maybe let's start right about there. We're going to go up to our animation presets and select single bound ground leaves. So now it takes off, and it's honestly, you can't see it very well with motion capture off. You can see it if I, isolate. Wow, my voice cracked. You can see it if I isolate them here. They look pretty crazy. They look really good with the motion blur on. Motion blur on is what really will sell actually all of these, so make sure your motion blur is on for all your particles. But they fly up and blend into the shot. So let me show you how this is different. This layer, this specific particular layer is different than the roof leaves, for example. And the biggest one there is velocity from motion. I have velocity from motion up to about 15. And what I'm doing here is, you'll see my keyframe. I've also keyframed in my emitter position. And I did this in the Exploding Man tutorial. I've done this in several tutorials because I think it gets a really organic motion out of the particles. And that's by velocity from motion will basically add a velocity to your particles based on the motion of your emitter. So if your emitter is flinging, is quickly scattering back and forth like this, your particles are going to go flying about back and forth. It's going to throw your particles. And so the emitter burst is happening with the particles per second, just like it was earlier. But you can see my position, X, Y, and Z are all keyframed very close together with very drastic movements. So they're flinging those particles everywhere. So that looks kind of like Cameron is jumping and flinging the particles around in the air. And the color settings are set, color from gradient, and the color over life, the gradient here is pretty similar to the one on the roof, a little darker, because there's a few darker elements down here, the darker leaves. So that's that, and it goes the same for the tree leaves. Let's create a new solid. Call it particular tree leaves. I typed that one perfectly. Thank you, everybody. The tutorial will be on next week. We'll apply particular. Go to the point where we want because every time we apply a preset, those first keyframes that are in the preset will start where your cursor is. So we want to move the cursor to the point that we will want those keyframes to start. And the keyframes are all in the particles per second, and like in this, in the ground leaves, the motion. So we want those keyframes to start they're going to start where the cursor is, so we want the cursor to be where we want them to start. Yeah, there you go. Engrave that on something. So here's where we probably want the tree leaves to start. We'll go up here, single bound tree leaves, and boom, there are our tree leaves. Let's apply motion blur to help sell it. So now these leaves are falling down. As you can expect, the big difference here is the color. I have now changed the gradient to match the color of these leaves. But that gives you an idea of how I did that. And there's one other particle emitter that we want to add, and that's over here actually on the roof, and it's going to be dust. So what we want to do is we want to add a new solid. Call it particular roof dust. Or let's call it dust. We want to apply Trapcode particular, and we will take our cursor to where we want the dust to begin. Right there seems good. And animation presets, we'll go to single bound dust. And one thing you'll notice is the dust that comes out here is going to look kind of bad at first, because it's going to be super dark. And that's because this preset that I have, the shading I have turned on because I was experimenting in a previous comp, and that's where I created this preset, and I had lights involved and stuff, but I decided not to. So if I add a light, for example, you'll see suddenly it's lit up. But that could complicate some of our other particles. That could complicate any 3D elements we bring into it. So just to keep it simple, based after in the wake of my mistakes, we'll go to shading and turn it off. And this dust I created. If you really want to get into how this is these particles and stuff and particle systems and all these elements are set up, I actually started from this great quick tip on Red Giant TV. Watch that. That's got some really, really, really great dust. It's really great stuff on dust and with using Trapcode particular. But it's great because now dust kind of settles up. And it's a lot of dust, so it kind of seems like this is the dirtiest house in the world. which obviously, based on the vegetation and foliage like growing around it, you can tell that it probably is the dirtiest house on the face of the planet. And then we need to add some camera shake. And it's more just a reaction. We're going to pre-comp that and call it main comp. Pre-comp everything. And then we're going to turn motion blur on, make sure it's on. And apply CC Reptile so that we can move the camera around and move the image around and not see the edges of frame. Set the tiling to unfold. Turn expand right, left, down, and up is up a whole bunch. And then we're going to apply wiggle position. And the wiggle is only going to happen when Cameron flies up. Right about there. So apply wiggle position. And we're going to keyframe some stuff so that it really just more reacts. We will go up here to wiggle position, set the speed to 5, and the amount, we'll hit our timer and set it to 0. Go a few frames over, set the amount to 15, and then go several frames over and set the amount to 0. So it just initially shakes when Cameron jumps up into the air. The next step, we want to apply looks, magic bullet looks, so we'll apply a new adjustment layer, and we'll rename it looks. And then we'll apply a magic bullet looks. So we can do some color correction. Unfortunately, in the last tutorial you saw, I had this preset that I had made for this very setting, this location, because I like how that looks. And just, again, I'll walk you through what's going on here. You can see the first layer with the saturation, boosts the saturation in the warmer colors and cools them in the greens. Diffusion, vignette, some lift and gamma and gain. And you can have curves on or not. I like it without. I think it looks good. Click finished. And then something we want to do is we want to keyframe. Whoa, okay, first thing we want to do is notice something I forgot to do. So it's important then, the next step is to realize that you are unexceptional and you make huge mistakes all the time. So we're going to double click on main comp, and this shadow layer where we have this mask, we forgot to fade it up. So we're going to keyframe our opacity of that layer to fade up after the camera movement has happened. So we'll go back to step 9 and doing our looks. And our look is applied here in the adjustment layer. What we want to do is that vignette around them, I want to have that move with the shot. So it kind of comes into shot. So we'll go to where the camera stops moving. We'll go to our adjustment layer with looks and we'll click the timer. And we'll go back over to the beginning of the camera move. Go down here so you can see the keyframes. We'll click edit and we'll now grab that vignette and move it over. Click finish and we watch it and realize, oh, the camera doesn't start moving immediately, so we'll move the keyframe over to where it does. And now you see the vignette moves with the shot. So that's it. Until next time, enjoy.
Whoa!
Great work, Seth. Thanks for the reminder that I need to pay my homeowner's insurance bill. Yeah. If you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to learn more about Seth and his work, check out his site at sethworley.com. There's great stuff there, including his web series Adventure Now and The Time Closet. Don't forget, you can always download a free trial of any of the Red Giant products that Seth used in this video at redgiantsoftware.com. And you can get tons of free presets for Red Giant plugins on redgiantpeople.com. In fact, Seth has been putting up a bunch of presets that he's created through his work as a director and as both a visual effects and motion graphics artist. Speaking of free, check out Colorista Free and LUT Buddy, 2 free color correction plugins that we're giving away for, that's right, free. You can find those at redgiantsoftware.com. Finally, I want to mention that if you're looking to keep up with what we're doing at Red Giant, whether it's a tutorial, a contest, a product release, or whatever, just follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and on our blog. Once again, I'm Alan Rabinowitz for RedGiantTV.com. See you next time.